When world-famous pianist Victor dared a quiet woman named Lena to play the piano, just to mock her, he thought it would be funny. He expected her to fumble, to embarrass herself. But what happened next left the entire concert hall in stunned silence. You never know who's hiding greatness behind a humble face. And in one breathtaking moment, everything changed. Golden chandeliers bathed the polished marble floors in soft, regal light. The gentle clink of crystal glasses mingled with low murmurs from an audience dressed in tuxedos and evening gowns. This wasn't just a concert. This was the venue, where legends were born and the elite came to be inspired. Victor Langston stood tall, adjusting his silk bow tie with practiced ease. At 58, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and decades of accolades behind him, he was royalty in the classical music world. Tonight's recital? Just another notch in his long list of triumphs. The evening's program featured Chopin's most complex compositions. To Victor, they were second nature. Nothing but muscle memory. "Mr. Langston, everything's ready for your performance," came a quiet voice from behind. He turned to see a woman in plain work clothes, a cream sweater, a gray skirt, and blonde hair tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Her name tag read Lena. She looked to be in her early 30s, hands rough from real labor, probably someone who mopped floors and set chairs. "Thank you," Victor replied, barely sparing her a glance. He was used to admirers, patrons, and elite company. Staff like Lena? They were background noise, unseen, unheard. Lena moved silently through the crowd, topping off water glasses and handing out programs with care. For the past 4 years, she'd been working at the concert hall, arriving before sunrise to clean the grand piano, dust every velvet seat, and make sure the room was flawless before each performance. She was never part of the show, but oh, how she loved the music. Something in those melodies stirred something deep inside her, something she never spoke about, not even to herself. When the grand hall was empty, Lena sometimes let her fingers drift across the piano keys. She didn't play loud, just enough to imagine what it might feel like to bring that kind of beauty to life. Not sweeping applause or spotlights. Just the feeling. Just the music. Victor happened to glance over again as she gently buffed out a smudge on the piano lid. Her movements were delicate, careful, almost like she was touching something sacred. He smirked. Did she actually think she understood what this instrument was really for? Did this cleaning girl think she grasped even a fraction of his genius? "Easy there," he said, lips curling into a condescending smile. "That piano's worth more than most people's homes." Startled, Lena looked up. "Yes, sir. I know how valuable it is." "Oh, I'm sure you do," he chuckled, turning his attention back to the small crowd gathering around him. By now, the audience had begun to take their seats. The buzz in the air was unmistakable. People came here for magic, and Victor always delivered. His performances were legendary, surgically precise, emotionally gripping. And tonight was set to be another masterpiece. At the back of the hall, Lena quietly took her usual post. Neither she nor Victor had any idea what was coming. But sometimes fate doesn't whisper. Sometimes it walks straight down the aisle and rewrites everything. The lights dimmed. With polished shoes clicking on marble, Victor stepped confidently toward the stage. He sat, placed his hands on the keys, and began. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 flowed out like honey, liquid gold poured through practiced hands. Each note landed with exactness. Each phrase sculpted by decades of discipline and brilliance. The crowd sat in stunned stillness, lost in his spell. From the back wall, Lena closed her eyes. She wasn't watching him. She was feeling it. She knew this piece. Every rise, every fall, every whisper of longing. The heartbreak tucked inside the melody. The wild hope wrapped in those chords. Her fingers moved unconsciously in the air, shadowing his. She'd studied this ballad for years, dozens of library recordings, worn headphones, and scribbled notes on borrowed sheet music. Music had always been her escape. Her safe place. Her secret. "Magnificent, isn't it?" whispered Mrs. Beaumont, one of the concert hall's biggest donors, leaning toward her guest. "Victor is simply beyond compare. There's no one alive who can interpret Chopin like he can," Mrs. Beaumont whispered, eyes gleaming with admiration. As the final note of the ballad faded, thunderous applause filled the room. Victor rose from the bench, gave a practiced bow, and soaked in the standing ovation like sunlight on his skin. This was his stage, his kingdom. He thrived in the glow of applause, the reverence, the knowing glances from elite patrons who saw him as untouchable, a vessel of rare brilliance the rest could only admire from a safe distance. "For my next selection," Victor said smoothly, his voice effortlessly echoing across the chamber, "I'll perform Chopin's Etude Opus 25, No. 6. Gasps fluttered across the room. It was no ordinary choice. One of the most technically demanding pieces ever written, he added, with just a touch of pride. Lena's breath hitched. She knew this etude, inside and out. It was a whirlwind of speed and emotion, a piece known for defeating even seasoned performers. She had studied it obsessively, note by note, phrase by phrase, but never, not once, had she dared touch it on an actual piano. Victor launched into it without hesitation. His hands blurred across the keys like hummingbird wings, rapid, fluid, impossibly controlled. The notes tumbled from the instrument like lightning, and the audience sat frozen in awe. But as the music swelled, something snagged Victor's attention and irritated him. That cleaning woman was still standing there. Lena. She stood at the back, eyes closed, face tilted slightly toward the stage. But what really got under his skin was her expression. Not just admiration, something deeper. She looked like she understood the music. Like it belonged to her. Like she belonged here. How absurd. What could someone like her possibly grasp about years of disciplined practice, the agony of sacrifice, the gift of true talent? She hadn't earned this. And yet she stood there, daring to feel something she couldn't possibly comprehend. It was insulting. Victor ended the AU to another round of roaring applause. He rose again, but this time, his eyes didn't sweep the crowd. They locked onto Lena, and a twisted little idea crept into his mind. It was time to remind everyone exactly who belonged in this world, and who didn't. As the clapping began to fade, Victor remained at the piano bench. A smirk tugged at the corners of his mouth. But instead of introducing his next piece, he turned in his seat and raised a hand toward the back. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice laced with theatrical charm. I couldn't help but notice a particularly attentive listener near the rear of the hall. Heads turned. Victor's smile widened. She seems quite moved by the music this evening. All eyes followed his gesture, straight to Lena. She froze. The weight of 100 stares crashed down on her at once. Her cheeks flushed deep red. And just like that, she became the center of attention in a room that had never once seen her. "You there," Victor said, lifting a hand and pointing straight at her. The young lady in the gray skirt. "You seem quite invested in tonight's music." A hush settled over the room. The question dangled in the air like bait, sharp and gleaming. "Tell me, do you play piano?" Lena's heart pounded like a drum in her chest. She could feel it, every eye on her, every curious stare from the crowd. The room's energy shifted, no longer admiration, but amusement. Not appreciation, entertainment. "A little," Lena whispered, barely audible. Victor's smile stretched wider. "A little? How delightfully modest," he said with a chuckle. "Well then, surely someone with such deep affection for Chopin wouldn't mind demonstrating a bit. For our distinguished guests, of course." Soft laughter rippled through the audience. They knew exactly what was going on. A master was about to expose an amateur. It was mean-spirited, but undeniably magnetic. Lena stepped back, palms clammy. "Oh, I couldn't. I'm just staff. I was only a—" "Nonsense," Victor cut in, standing with theatrical flair and gesturing toward the piano like a stage magician. "Music is for everyone, isn't it? You wouldn't want to disappoint our generous patrons. After all, they do keep this lovely place running." The trap had snapped shut. Say no, and she'd seem ungrateful. Say yes, and risk total humiliation. Victor knew exactly what he was doing, and he was relishing it. Mrs. Beaumont leaned forward, intrigued. A few guests exchanged uneasy glances, some seeing the cruelty in Victor's grin, others too entertained to care. "Come now," he coaxed, voice dripping with false warmth. "What's the worst that could happen? You've been listening so attentively. Who knows, you may have picked up a few tricks through sheer osmosis." That got another round of laughter, though this time it was more scattered. A few audience members were clearly squirming. Lena didn't move. Her thoughts spun like a carousel, her tiny apartment, her hourly paycheck, her place at the very bottom of this world. All the hours she'd spent dreaming about piano she could never touch. All the time she heard the music in her head, but never shared it out loud. And then, her father's voice echoed inside her. "Lena, sometimes life gives you a moment to show the world who you really are." She exhaled slowly. And then, she stepped forward. Her simple flats clicked across the marble floor, each step echoing louder than the last in the dead-silent hall. With every step, she carried the weight of their doubt, Victor's smugness, and her own trembling resolve. But she kept walking. Toward the piano. Toward her moment. "Wonderful!" Victor exclaimed, clapping his hands with exaggerated enthusiasm. Our brave volunteer steps forward. He turned to the audience, his grin growing wider. "So tell me," he asked, voice dripping with sarcasm, "what will you be attempting today? Twinkle, twinkle, little star? Or are you more of a Mary had a little lamb expert?" Laughter rippled through the audience, soft at first, then bolder. They were following his lead. He was in full performer mode now, feeding on the spotlight, playing the room with someone else's humiliation as the evening's encore. Lena approached the piano, her footsteps steady, but her hand trembled slightly as she reached out to touch the polished lid. It was breathtaking. A concert grand, sleek, powerful, steeped in legacy. You could almost feel the ghosts of greats who had once sat at this very bench. Their passion still lingered in the keys. She took a breath, then spoke, softly at first, but with growing clarity. "Actually," she said, "I was thinking Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor." The room went silent. Just like that, the laughter died. Victor's grin wavered. Just a flicker. Then he recovered, but this time, his smile had teeth. "Chopin's Ballade No. 1. He repeated, a chuckle riding on disbelief. "My dear girl, that's one of the most demanding compositions in the entire classical canon. It requires years of training, a level of I know what it requires, Lena said, gently interrupting as she lowered herself onto the bench. Her hands floated to the keys like they knew exactly where to go. For the first time all night, she didn't feel like staff. She felt like herself. Victor laughed again, but this one rang hollow, thinner, more uncertain. Well then, by all means, he said, stepping back with a showman's bow. This should be educational. The audience leaned forward. No one dared breathe. Some felt a deep pang of second-hand embarrassment, waiting for the inevitable crash of wrong notes and regret. But others, those paying closer attention, noticed something different. The way Lena sat. The quiet confidence in her spine. The stillness in her shoulders. And the way her fingers hovered, not hesitant, but reverent. Victor folded his arms and stepped back into the shadows of the stage, ready to savor the moment. He imagined the clumsy start. The mistakes. The awkward silence when she realized she was in over her head. Then he'd step in, flash his signature charm, offer a few polite corrections, and restore the natural balance of the universe. Whenever you're ready, Victor said, his tone laced with exaggerated politeness. Lena didn't answer. She simply closed her eyes, fingers resting lightly on the keys. In that brief silence, she wasn't in the concert hall anymore. She was back in a faded living room, beside her father, playing the same Chopin ballade they used to share before life split everything apart. No words this time. Just memory. Just music. When she opened her eyes again, the crowd stared back, waiting. She took a breath and began to play. The first notes rang out with piercing clarity, and Victor's smirk faltered. What came from the piano wasn't tentative. It wasn't shy or awkward. It was precise, purposeful, and filled with something Victor hadn't expected at all: truth. Chopin's ballade, no. One flowed from Lena's hands like it had always lived there. Each phrase carried the weight of experience. Each note, a conversation she'd been having with this piece for years. She didn't sound like someone attempting greatness. She sounded like someone returning home. Victor's expression shifted from amused to puzzled, then quickly to something darker. Alarm. This couldn't be happening. The articulation, the phrasing, the emotional command. It felt like someone else had taken her place. Someone trained, seasoned, gifted. As Lena moved into the ballade's first major theme, she unlocked layers of meaning that even Victor had overlooked. She illuminated hidden harmonies, lifted out inner voices that changed the entire tone of the melody. Suddenly, the audience wasn't just watching a spectacle. They were witnessing a revelation. Mrs. Beaumont's jaw slackened. Dozens leaned forward, no longer expecting embarrassment, but something entirely different. Lena's hands moved fearlessly through the middle section, the gauntlet that crushed so many performers. But for her, it was effortless. No hesitation, no struggle, only grace. Yet beyond the flawless technique, there was something deeper, something Victor hadn't brought to his own performance. Honesty. She wasn't just playing music. She was speaking through it. Her notes told a story of yearning, of dreams shelved and rediscovered, of beauty hiding where no one bothered to look. The music became a confession, a window into a life most had ignored. And Victor, arms crossed, waiting for the slip-up, found himself listening, really listening, not for flaws, but for what came next. Because, despite himself, he was being pulled into the world she was creating. How was this even possible? Who was this woman? The climactic section of the ballade arrived, and Lena didn't hesitate. She dove into it with a passion so raw, so unfiltered, it pulled the air from the room. Her entire body moved with the music, fluid, intentional, alive. Every phrase had weight. Every note landed like it meant something. And the piano responded. Under her hands, it didn't just play, it sang. It was as if the instrument had been holding its breath, waiting all evening for someone who truly knew how to set it free. As she entered the final stretch, something shifted. Her playing took on a haunting quality, almost otherworldly. The sorrow in Chopin's melody didn't feel distant or historical anymore. It felt personal, immediate. Tears streamed down Lena's cheeks, but her hands never faltered. If anything, the emotion only sharpened her focus. The vulnerability in her sound didn't weaken the performance, it elevated it. Made it real. The audience sat utterly still. No coughing, no shuffling, just silence. Some blinked away tears of their own, unable to explain why a stranger's music was stirring up their forgotten memories. Because this wasn't just a performance, it was a kind of reckoning. A moment of truth. A window into the soul of someone the world had overlooked. Victor hadn't moved. Not an inch. He stood frozen, his foundation shaking beneath him. Everything he believed about talent, pedigree, and the right to stand on stages like this was unraveling with every measure. This simple woman, the cleaner he tried to mock, was unraveling him in front of his own audience. Then came the final passage. The one where Chopin distilled an entire lifetime of grief and beauty into a few aching bars. And Lena delivered it like a prayer. Each note floated into the air, featherlight yet piercing. The hall no longer felt like a concert venue. It felt sacred. She wasn't just playing. She was releasing something bigger than skill or practice. And then, silence. The last chord faded gently, like a candle extinguished by a whisper. The room held its breath. So still, you could hear the ticking of the antique clock out in the lobby, through the closed doors. And then, Mrs. Beaumont rose to her feet. Tears shimmered in her eyes as she clapped. Once, twice, then faster, louder. Not polite applause. Not social obligation. Real, thunderous appreciation reserved for the kind of artistry that didn't just impress. It changed people. One by one, the audience rose to their feet. The applause swelled, echoing off every wall, every balcony, until it filled every corner of the grand hall like a wave of thunder. But Victor didn't move. He just stood there, staring at Lena like he was truly seeing her for the very first time. This woman, the one he dismissed as background, as just staff, had just delivered one of the most soul-stirring performances he'd ever witnessed. And the truth hit him like a punch to the chest. He'd been wrong. Not just a little wrong. Utterly, completely, shamefully wrong. Lena remained seated at the piano, dazed by the reaction. She'd never played for anyone but herself, not like this. Never imagined her music could reach inside others the way it had just done. All those years in her tiny apartment, cracked walls, second-hand headphones, stacks of borrowed sheet music, had led her to this impossible moment. That, Victor began, then faltered. The words, usually so easy for him, refused to come. He took a few steps toward the piano. Slowly, almost like approaching something sacred. How long have you been playing? He finally asked, his voice lower now. Sincere. Lena wiped the tears from her cheeks. Since I was 8, she said quietly. My dad taught me. He was a pianist too. But he never got chances like this. Victor felt something break inside, some old, hardened piece of pride and entitlement he'd carried for decades. The armor he wore in every room, the one built from privilege, prestige, assumptions, began to crack. I owe you an apology, he said, the words catching in his throat. What I did tonight, it was wrong. Inexcusable. The room quieted again, sensing something deeply human unfolding, raw, real. But it wasn't just between Victor and Lena anymore. Something was shifting in the entire audience. People were exchanging glances, rethinking what they thought they knew about class, talent, value. Lena rose from the bench, her voice gentle but steady. You don't owe me anything, she said. Music doesn't belong to any one person. It belongs to anyone who feels it. Victor stood still, humbled in a way he had never experienced. And then, after a breath, Would you consider playing the second half of tonight's program? The question landed in the silence, heavy with redemption and something else. Hope. Lena blinked. I couldn't possibly. But Victor shook his head, firm now. You already did the impossible. He stepped aside, and the stage was hers. Please, Victor said softly. And this time, the word carried no arrogance, no superiority, just respect. Real, honest respect. I've been performing for 35 years, he added, and I've never heard Chopin played with such truth. He looked around the hall, voice steady. The audience deserves this gift. From the front row, Mrs. Beaumont called out, Yes, dear, please continue. That was extraordinary. Other voices joined in, warm, insistent, encouraging. What had started as a cold, curated evening of highbrow entertainment had shifted into something deeper. Something human. This wasn't about status anymore. This was about soul. Lena glanced out at the sea of faces. These weren't strangers now. Not intimidating eyes behind pearls and tuxedos. They were people connected to her by the invisible thread of music. She thought of her father again. Of every time he reminded her, music is a gift. And gifts are meant to be shared. Maybe. One more piece, she said quietly. Victor stepped back. No resistance. The stage was hers now. And he understood, his role wasn't a guide or correct, but simply to witness. Lena placed her fingers gently on the keys and chose a piece that had comforted her through long, lonely nights. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The first notes drifted through the hall like a whispered lullaby, softer than the ballade, more intimate. It didn't demand attention, it invited it. This was a song of quiet sorrow, quiet hope, played by someone who knew both intimately. And in the stillness, something remarkable happened. People in the audience began to look inward. Mrs. Beaumont thought of her housekeeper, the one she'd passed 1,000 times without truly seeing. What hidden music might live behind that quiet, familiar face? A businessman blinked back tears, remembering the violin he'd locked away after college. A socialite glanced at the woman beside her, wondering how many dreams she dismissed over silverware and small talk. Victor listened too, but not with critique. With awe. And something else, gratitude. Lena wasn't just good. She wasn't just talented. She was an artist in the truest sense, someone who played not for applause, but for connection. And through her, Victor remembered why he had fallen in love with music in the first place, before the awards, before the interviews, before the ego. As the final notes of the nocturne hovered in the air like breath, the audience rose once again, thunderous in their appreciation. Victor stepped forward. His eyes met hers, not as a critic, but as an equal. He took Lena's hand, turned to the crowd, and spoke with a humility that had never touched his voice before. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his words clear and steady, Tonight you've witnessed something rare. He paused. The emergence of a true artist. Lena has reminded us all, Victor said quietly, that music isn't about pedigree or prestige. It's about the courage to share what's inside your heart. The standing ovation roared on, not just applause now, but celebration. Not of perfection, but of truth. 8 months later, Lena walked across those same marble floors at the concert hall. But everything was different. This time, her name appeared on the evening's program, in graceful, serif script. Lena Caldwell, piano. Outside, posters announced her debut recital, sponsored by a new scholarship fund Victor had launched, one dedicated to uncovering raw, overlooked talent. Mrs. Beaumont greeted her at the entrance, pride radiating from her face. "My dear," she said warmly, "I still can't believe this is the same young woman who was polishing our wine glasses just months ago." Lena smiled gently. "I'm still the same person," she said. "I just have a bigger piano now." Victor joined them, his presence quieter these days. Gone was the arrogance from that unforgettable night. In its place, humility, growth, and gratitude. His experience with Lena had changed him deeply. It moved him to start a foundation that searched for music in places no one thought to look. Tonight, he wouldn't be the star. He'd serve as her page turner, a symbolic reversal of everything they once were. And he wore the role with pride. "Nervous?" he asked softly. "Terrified," Lena confessed. "But also, grateful. If I hadn't challenged you that night. If I hadn't been a complete fool, you mean?" Victor interjected, with a sheepish grin. He shook his head. "I almost let my ego destroy something beautiful. I'm still learning how to be better." Inside, the hall was sold out. But the crowd hadn't come for a novelty. They weren't here to witness a cleaner who shocked a pianist. They came seeking her. The soul. The honesty. The emotion that had once left them breathless. Lena sat down at the grand piano. She paused, fingertips brushing the keys. This time, she didn't feel invisible. She thought of the journey behind her, her father's death, the abrupt end to her formal training, the long, quiet years spent cleaning while music lived silently inside her. For a long time, she believed that part of her was gone. But dreams, she'd come to learn, don't die. They wait. They wait for a moment to rise again. And sometimes, all it takes is believing in yourself. The lights dimmed, and Lena began to play the same Chopin ballade that had changed everything. But tonight, she wasn't playing it as a surprise. She was playing it as a celebration. A celebration of second chances, of quiet resilience, of being seen. In the audience, Victor listened with tears silently slipping down his cheeks. All his life, he'd chased flawless technique. But Lena had taught him something greater. That music's real power doesn't lie in perfection. It lies in its ability to reach across the silence and touch another human heart. That night, Lena had given him a gift. The chance to remember his own humanity. As the final notes drifted into silence and the audience rose to their feet in heartfelt applause, one truth echoed through the hall. Sometimes, the most powerful music comes from the most unexpected places, played by hands that have known both struggle and hope. What did you think of Lena's incredible journey? Have you ever discovered hidden talent where you least expected it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments below. And if this tale of second chances and unseen brilliance touched your heart, make sure to subscribe and tap that notification bell. There are so many more inspiring stories still to come. Where are you watching from today? Let me know down in the comments. Your voice matters here. And remember, you never know who around you might be carrying an extraordinary gift. Sometimes, all it takes is someone willing to believe. Until next time, keep your hearts open to life's most beautiful surprises.